What would you do if you saw someone being treated unfairly? Would you step in, or would you stay silent? Imagine this. A school bus driver, just doing his job, suddenly finds himself confronted by the police. Now, this isn't just any driver. He's the one these kids have relied on every single day. The one who's kept them safe. And now, right in front of their eyes, he's being harassed. How do you think the kids would react? Would they be afraid? Or maybe they'd stand up in a way that no one expected. In this video, we're diving into a powerful story. One that shows how a group of children did something remarkable in a moment of unfairness. It's a story of courage, unity, and the kind of unexpected heroism that catches everyone off guard. We'll take you through each moment of this incident, revealing details that weren't widely reported, details that will leave you questioning what you might have done in their place. So why should you stick around till the end? Because this story isn't just about one bus driver or one group of kids. It's about the power of standing up for what's right, even when no one else does. We'll explore the facts behind the situation and the unexpected actions of these students. Actions that, in the face of injustice, sent a message much louder than words. You'll learn the surprising impact this moment had on everyone involved, and how a simple act of courage can change the course of events. And maybe, just maybe, by the end, you'll find yourself inspired to do the same if you ever witness unfairness. Stay tuned, because what these kids did next, well, let's just say it's not something you'll soon forget. Imagine a chilly morning, just like any other school day. It's early, and the city streets are still quiet, the sun just peeking over the horizon, casting long shadows that stretch across the empty roads. A school bus pulls up to a row of houses, the bright yellow paint standing out against the gray, sleepy landscape. Inside the bus, the atmosphere is lively. Kids are laughing, chatting, maybe even bickering about homework or their latest video game scores. Their bus driver, Mr. Anderson, sits calmly behind the wheel, steering with a steady hand, as he's done every morning for years. He's a familiar face, one that parents trust and children feel safe with. Mr. Anderson is no stranger to these kids. He knows them by name, remembers who's allergic to peanuts, and who always forgets their lunch. To him, this isn't just a job. He's part of their daily lives, a small but essential part of their journey from home to school and back again. For Mr. Anderson, every morning begins the same way. He arrives early, checks the bus thoroughly, making sure everything is just right, from the engine's hum to the neatly arranged emergency kits. There's a quiet pride in his routine. He may not be a teacher or a parent, but he knows he plays a role in their day, even if it's a small one. But today, as he watches the kids settle in and the bus rumbles to life, he has no idea that the day will take a sharp, unexpected turn. The bus moves along its usual route, winding through neighborhoods where kids wave from sidewalks, some sleepily dragging their backpacks, others running as they realize they're about to miss the bus. The world outside blurs into a familiar rhythm, and inside the bus, Mr. Anderson's soft voice reminds them to sit down and hold tight. Some listen, others don't. They know he'll remind them again. This is the kind of routine that feels invincible, like it could go on forever without ever changing. But change can come without warning, can't it? As they approach a main intersection, Mr. Anderson's calm routine is suddenly shattered. In his rearview mirror, he notices a police car tailing them, its flashing lights piercing the morning haze. His heart skips a beat. He's done nothing wrong. Of that he's sure. But still, the sight of those lights, the sound of the siren growing louder, sends a chill down his spine. The children notice it too. Conversations die down as their eyes shift from their phones and books to the window. Whispers fill the bus. Questions about why the police are here, what they could want. One brave kid calls out, "Hey, Mr. Anderson, what's going on?" Mr. Anderson doesn't have an answer. He simply tells them to stay calm and quiet. As the bus slows to a stop at the side of the road, Mr. Anderson's mind races through possibilities. He thinks of his family, his wife, and kids waiting for him at home. He knows he hasn't broken any laws, yet the police are approaching. Why? What could they possibly want with a school bus driver on a regular morning? He takes a deep breath as two officers step out of the car and approach the bus. There's a tension in their walk, a sense of purpose that feels almost out of place. Mr. Anderson rolls down his window, hoping for a brief exchange, perhaps a misunderstanding that will be quickly resolved. The children watch, their faces pressed against the glass, their whispers hushed. They don't fully understand what's happening, but they can sense something's off. Kids are observant that way, picking up on the smallest hints of trouble, especially when it involves someone they trust. Mr. Anderson is their guide, their protector on these roads, and seeing him treated with suspicion feels unsettling, even wrong. One of the officers gestures for Mr. Anderson to step out of the bus. A jolt of fear strikes him. He's never been asked to do this before. He hesitates, looking back at the kids, trying to reassure them with a forced smile, though his hands are trembling. He steps down from the bus, feeling the weight of all those young eyes on him, the eyes that trust him to keep them safe. In that moment, he feels a sharp pang of vulnerability. He's no longer in control. The officer's voice is firm, almost accusatory, as they begin questioning him. The words identification and registration float in the air, formal and cold. Mr. Anderson tries to answer calmly, his voice shaking slightly as he explains who he is, what he does, and where he's going. But the officers don't seem satisfied. They ask more questions, probing deeper, their tone growing sharper. Inside the bus, the children are silent now, their faces pressed against the windows, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. They've never seen Mr. Anderson like this, defenseless, vulnerable, standing there under the watchful gaze of authority. A few of them look at each other, their expressions mirroring the same question. Why is this happening? As the questioning drags on, Mr. Anderson's confidence starts to wane. The officers continue to press him, their questions becoming increasingly aggressive, as if trying to find something, anything, to justify their actions. He feels his face growing hot, a mix of fear, frustration, and shame washing over him. He knows he's done nothing wrong, yet here he is, on the side of the road, treated as if he has something to hide. And then, the officers' questions shift, taking on a more personal tone. They start to ask about his background, where he's from, as if that somehow changes the fact that he's just a bus driver, trying to get these kids to school. The insinuations are subtle but unmistakable. Mr. Anderson feels his heart pounding in his chest, his mind reeling as he grapples with the implications of their words. The children, still watching intently, sense the change too. They may not understand all the words, but they understand enough to know that something isn't right. One of the older students, a girl sitting near the front, clenches her fists. She can feel a mix of anger and helplessness rising within her, an urge to speak up, to do something. But what can she do? They're just kids, after all. And these are police officers. Outside, Mr. Anderson's voice starts to waver as he answers yet another question, his patience wearing thin. He's tried to remain calm, respectful, hoping to diffuse the situation. But the tension only seems to grow, thickening with each passing moment. He feels trapped, cornered, and utterly powerless. And then, just when it seems like the situation can't get any worse, one of the officers begins to raise his voice. He accuses Mr. Anderson of being uncooperative, of withholding information. Mr. Anderson's mind races. He's told them everything they've asked, given them everything they need. So why are they still here, still pressing him? It's as if they're determined to find something, anything, to justify their actions. Back on the bus, the children watch in stunned silence, their faces reflecting a mix of confusion, fear, and something else, a simmering anger. They may be young, but they know right from wrong. They can see the injustice in the way Mr. Anderson is being treated, and it bothers them deeply. These are kids who've been taught to trust adults, to respect authority, but now they're witnessing a moment that challenges everything they've been taught. As the minutes drag on, the atmosphere grows heavier. Mr. Anderson, once the steady, calm presence on their journey to school, now looks weary and defeated. And the kids can feel it too, the weight of the unfairness pressing down on them, stirring something within that they can't quite put into words. Then, in a small but powerful moment, one of the younger kids whispers, "Why are they treating him like this? He didn't do anything wrong." It's a question that lingers in the air, unanswered, hanging over the bus like a dark cloud. Outside, the officers continue questioning Mr. Anderson, their words growing sharper, their tones more intimidating with each exchange. By now, every student on the bus has noticed something feels deeply wrong. For kids who have only ever seen police officers in a position of protection, this scene before them feels surreal, like a scene from a movie they never wanted to be part of. But unlike the movies, this is real. This is Mr. Anderson. They're Mr. Anderson, standing helplessly under the harsh scrutiny of authority, and it's happening right in front of their eyes. As the minutes pass, the students' discomfort turns to anger. They've always known Mr. Anderson as a kind, patient man, someone who has driven them through rain and snow, always with a reassuring smile. They can't understand why the police are treating him this way, and the helplessness eats away at them. These kids may be young, but they understand right from wrong, and to them, this situation is as wrong as it gets. One of the older students, Mariah, sits near the front, watching the scene unfold with a clenched jaw. She's in high school, a bit older than the rest, and she's always seen Mr. Anderson as more than just a bus driver. He's been a constant in her life, the friendly face she sees every morning, the person who makes her feel safe. Now, seeing him out there, struggling to defend himself, stirs something deep inside her. She looks around, her eyes meeting the faces of the other students, all sharing the same silent question. What can we do? Meanwhile, Mr. Anderson's attempts to stay calm are wearing thin. He's answered every question, shown every piece of identification, yet the officers continue their interrogation. Their voices grow louder, accusing him of being uncooperative. The frustration in Mr. Anderson's face is clear, but his fear is stronger. He doesn't want to make a scene, especially in front of the kids, but he also doesn't want to be accused of something he didn't do. Back on the bus, the tension is palpable. Mariah decides she can't just sit and watch anymore. She stands up, looking around at her friends. Her voice is barely a whisper, but it's filled with determination as she says, "We can't just sit here. This isn't right." Mr. Anderson didn't do anything wrong. A few heads nod in agreement, others look uncertain. But one thing is clear, Mariah's words have sparked something. She glances around the bus, meeting the eyes of her classmates, and asks, "Who's with me?" At first, there's a pause, a moment of hesitation as they realize what standing up might mean. But then, one by one, hands start to go up, faces showing the mixture of fear and courage. The younger kids look to the older ones, unsure but willing to follow. They're nervous, yes, but their sense of loyalty to Mr. Anderson outweighs their fear. Maria moves to the front of the bus, her heart pounding. She's never done anything like this before, never thought she'd find herself leading a group, especially not against authority. But the unfairness of the situation fuels her, pushing her forward. She raises her hand, signaling for everyone to stay quiet, and then, gathering her courage, she opens the bus door. The officers turn, startled to see a young girl stepping off the bus, her face set with determination. Mr. Anderson looks over, his expression one of shock, and perhaps a hint of pride. He hadn't expected anyone to stand up for him, least of all the students. But here they are, a group of kids willing to risk standing up for what's right. Maria's voice is steady, even as her hand shakes slightly. She looks directly at the officers and says, "Excuse me, officers, but why are you treating Mr. Anderson like this? He hasn't done anything wrong. He's our bus driver, and we know him. He's a good person." Her words are simple, but they carry weight. The other students begin to step off the bus, gathering behind her, a quiet show of unity and support. The officers look taken aback, clearly not expecting this. They exchange glances, a hint of irritation flashing in their eyes. One of them steps forward, addressing Mariah in a tone that's meant to be intimidating. "This is official police business. It's best if you stay on the bus and let us do our job." But Mariah doesn't back down. She feels the eyes of her classmates on her, the weight of their silent support giving her strength. She lifts her chin, her voice unwavering as she responds, "With all due respect, we have a right to know why you're treating him this way. He's never done anything wrong, and you're scaring us. We just want to go to school." The officer's face hardens, but before he can respond, another voice pipes up from the group of students. It's David, a normally quiet kid who usually keeps to himself. His voice is soft, but there's a conviction in his words that resonates. "Yeah, Mr. Anderson is a good person. He's always been nice to us. Why are you treating him like he's done something bad?" The officers are visibly uncomfortable now, caught off guard by the growing chorus of voices. They hadn't anticipated this kind of reaction, certainly not from a group of schoolchildren. The situation has escalated beyond what they expected, and they find themselves on the defensive, a position they're clearly unaccustomed to. One of the officers, perhaps in an attempt to regain control, raises his voice, addressing the group. "This isn't your concern. We're handling a situation, and we don't need interference." But his words don't have the effect he hopes for. Instead of silencing the students, it only seems to embolden them. Another student, Lisa, a 7th grader with a reputation for speaking her mind, steps forward, her small frame radiating defiance. She looks directly at the officer, her voice firm. "You're the ones making it our concern. You're stopping us from going to school, and you're treating Mr. Anderson like he's a criminal. That's not fair." The officers exchange glances, a mix of frustration and confusion crossing their faces. They hadn't planned for this, hadn't expected to be questioned, least of all by a group of kids. But the children aren't backing down. Their loyalty to Mr. Anderson, their sense of right and wrong, outweighs their fear of authority. They've seen something unfair, something that doesn't sit right with them, and they're not about to ignore it. At this point, the entire group of students has gathered outside the bus, standing together in a show of solidarity. Their presence is a quiet but powerful statement, a reminder that sometimes courage comes from the most unexpected places. The officers, faced with this wall of determined young faces, begin to waver. They realize they're losing control of the situation, that their authority is being questioned in a way they hadn't anticipated. One of the officers, perhaps sensing the futility of further confrontation, lowers his voice, addressing Mr. Anderson. "Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. We just need to check a few things, and then you'll be on your way." There's a note of reluctance in his tone, as if he's conceding a small battle he never intended to fight. Mr. Anderson nods, his relief palpable. He glances at the students, a look of gratitude in his eyes. He hadn't expected anyone to stand up for him, least of all these kids. But their courage has given him a renewed sense of strength, a reminder that he's not alone in this moment. The students remain silent, watching as the officers conclude their questioning, their authority visibly diminished. They may not fully understand the complexities of the situation, but they know one thing for certain. They've stood up for someone they care about, and they've made a difference. As the officers finally step back, signaling that Mr. Anderson is free to go, a wave of relief washes over the group. The children exchange glances, a sense of pride filling the air. They've faced a moment of injustice, and together, they've confronted it. Their actions, simple as they may seem, have sent a powerful message, a message of solidarity, of courage, and of the power that comes from standing up for what's right. The officers return to their car, their expressions unreadable, and drive away without another word. The students watch as the police car disappears down the road, a mixture of relief and triumph in their eyes. They faced a moment they'll remember for years to come, a moment that showed them the importance of standing together, of standing up, even when it's difficult. Mr. Anderson, visibly moved, thanks each of them, his voice thick with emotion. He knows he owes them more than words can express, knows that their support has given him the courage to face a situation he never expected. As they board the bus, the atmosphere is different. There's a sense of unity, a bond that's been forged in the fire of that confrontation. The bus pulled away from the scene, but for the students, the weight of what had just happened lingered in the air, pressing down on them with a heaviness they couldn't shake. There was a silence, a kind of reflective stillness, that filled the bus, an unspoken understanding passing between each of them. They had come together for Mr. Anderson in a way they never had before, standing up to protect someone they saw as family. And now, as they sat in their seats, staring out at the streets they traveled every day, they knew that something profound had shifted within each of them. Mariah, the high school senior who had led the charge, leaned her head against the window, her mind racing. She replayed the officer's face in her head, the way he'd initially looked at Mr. Anderson, as though he'd done something wrong. The disbelief and courage she had felt when she'd stepped off that bus had been instinctual, almost like she hadn't chosen to act. It was just something that had to be done. But now, sitting there in the quiet, she felt the gravity of what they'd all stood up against. This was no small act of rebellion. They had defended Mr. Anderson's dignity. And for the first time, she understood what it meant to take a stand, even when it was scary. Mr. Anderson, who had been so calm and brave in front of the officers, was now gripping the steering wheel with shaking hands. The image of his students standing up for him kept flashing in his mind, and he felt an overwhelming mix of gratitude, pride, and sorrow. He had always been the strong one, the adult they could rely on. Yet here they were, just kids, and they'd stepped into a role no one should ever have to play at their age. As he drove, he glanced up in the rearview mirror at Mariah and the others, his heart swelling with an emotion too deep for words. What they'd done was brave, and it meant the world to him, but he wished they'd never had to do it. But the impact of this moment didn't end with them. News of the incident spread quickly through the school and the community. By the time the students arrived at school, teachers and students alike were buzzing with questions and shock. Word had spread about how a group of students had confronted police officers, standing up for their bus driver against what they saw as unfair treatment. And in that small school, where most things went unnoticed, this event sparked a fire of conversations and questions that no one could ignore. In the hallways, students whispered to each other, asking if anyone had heard the full story. For those who had been on the bus, the reality of their actions was only just beginning to sink in. Their classmates treated them with a newfound respect, looking at them with wide-eyed admiration, as if they were heroes. But for Mariah and the others, it wasn't about heroism. It was about doing the right thing. Each of them felt a subtle shift, a maturity brought on by standing up to injustice. And as they relayed the story to friends, the reality of what they had done and what it meant grew even more profound. Back in his quiet home later that evening, Mr. Anderson sat down, trying to process everything that had happened. The experience had shaken him in a way he couldn't fully describe. As a black man, he had faced prejudice before, but this moment had been different. The look on the officers' faces, the suspicion, the way they'd spoken to him, it had struck a deep, raw nerve. He was used to shielding himself from these moments, but this time he hadn't been alone. Those kids, his kids, had seen it all, and they had stepped forward, unafraid, to protect him. In the days that followed, the community's reaction was overwhelming. Parents called the school, wanting to express their support, their gratitude, and their disbelief at the situation their children had faced. Many of them were deeply moved, amazed that their kids had shown such bravery, while others felt a simmering anger over the reality of the situation. Some questioned why the incident had even happened in the first place, wondering what had led the police to target Mr. Anderson so unfairly. The community was divided, with some defending the actions of the officers, while others stood firmly behind Mr. Anderson and the students. It became a topic of heated debate, not just at the school, but throughout the entire town. For the students who had been on the bus, the incident became something they couldn't escape. Teachers asked them to talk about it. Friends bombarded them with questions, and strangers approached them, wanting to hear the story firsthand. It was a strange feeling, being seen as symbols of courage and defiance. Many of them struggled to process their feelings. One moment proud, the next uncertain. They hadn't expected their actions to resonate so strongly with so many people. It had felt, in the moment, like the only choice. But now, seeing how much it meant to others, they realized the power that even small acts of bravery could hold. The incident also prompted discussions within the school. The administration organized meetings, bringing in counselors to talk with the students about their feelings and experiences. They acknowledged the trauma that the students may have faced, offering them a space to discuss the fears, anxieties, and challenges they had encountered. For Maria, these discussions were both cathartic and overwhelming. She hadn't considered herself a leader, but now people looked to her as the one who had spoken up first, the one who had shown courage when others were afraid. Mr. Anderson, too, found himself at the center of these discussions. The school invited him to speak, asking him to share his perspective and to help students understand the broader social issues at play. He spoke openly about his experiences, describing the reality of being a black man in America and the challenges he had faced throughout his life. He told them about the subtle, everyday prejudices, the moments of fear and frustration, and the resilience he had learned to cultivate over the years. His words resonated deeply with the students, many of whom were hearing about these issues for the first time. For some, it was a wake-up call, a realization that the world was more complicated than they had known. And for Mr. Anderson, it was an opportunity to share his truth, to help the next generation understand the importance of empathy, awareness, and action. As time passed, the memory of that day remained vivid in the minds of everyone involved. For the students, it was a moment that had transformed them, a rite of passage that had forced them to confront the harsh realities of the world. It was a lesson in courage, compassion, and the power of standing up for what was right. And for Mr. Anderson, it was a reminder that even in the face of prejudice and injustice, there were allies, people who would stand by him, no matter their age or background. The community, too, continued to grapple with the impact of the incident. Parents, teachers, and students engaged in ongoing conversations about racial inequality, the role of police, and the importance of unity. The event became a catalyst for change, prompting the school to incorporate discussions on social justice, empathy, and diversity into the curriculum. The community organized forums, inviting speakers and activists to discuss these issues, creating a space for dialogue and learning. For Maria and the other students, this experience became a defining moment in their lives. They had stepped up when it mattered, and the courage they had shown became a source of strength they carried with them in the years that followed. They understood that their actions had made a difference, not only for Mr. Anderson but for everyone who had witnessed their bravery. It was a reminder that even in the face of fear, they could make a stand, that they had the power to challenge injustice, and that sometimes the smallest voices could make the loudest impact. The morning after the incident, a strange quiet settled over the school, almost as if everyone was holding their breath. It wasn't the usual bustling energy of kids chatting, laughing, and scurrying through the hallways. This was something heavier, something that lingered and stayed with everyone who'd heard what had happened. The story of Mr. Anderson and the students had spread like wildfire, and by the time the first class started, nearly everyone in the community had heard the news. Parents, teachers, friends, neighbors, each had their own take on the event, their own opinions and emotions. For some, it was a disturbing reminder of issues they tried to forget or ignore. For others, it was a rallying cry, a sign that it was time to face uncomfortable truths that affected everyone. And for the students involved, it was a moment they knew would stay with them, one that had somehow, in an instant, thrust them into a world far more complex than they'd known. The school principal, Mrs. Thompson, was the first to address the incident formally. That morning, over the school intercom, she expressed her support for Mr. Anderson and thanked the students who had shown courage and compassion in the face of adversity. She acknowledged that many of them were left with questions, confusion, and even anger. Her voice was calm and measured, but underneath it was a tension that everyone could feel. She announced that there would be an assembly later in the week, inviting students, staff, and even members of the community to come together and discuss what had happened, why it mattered, and how they could all learn from it. The assembly was packed. Rows of seats filled quickly, and extra chairs were brought in. But even then, people stood along the back and sides of the room, wanting to be part of the moment. There was an undeniable tension in the air, an expectation that something big was about to unfold. The students who had been on the bus sat together, some holding hands, others glancing nervously around. For them, it was a mix of pride and fear. They knew what they had done, but they also knew that not everyone agreed with them. There were whispers, there were doubts, and there was a divide that had become clear in the community. The assembly began with a local social worker, Ms. Delgado, stepping up to speak. She was well respected, known for her work with the community and her dedication to social justice. She began by recounting the event, her voice steady but filled with empathy. She spoke about the challenges that people of color often face, the judgments and assumptions that can follow them through life. But she didn't stop there. She went on to talk about courage, about standing up for what's right even when it's difficult or dangerous. And she looked directly at the students who had been on that bus, her gaze filled with admiration and pride. As Ms. Delgado spoke, the room seemed to come alive with an energy that was hard to describe. It was as if her words were a spark, igniting something within each person there. She shared stories, real stories, of people who had faced injustice and had chosen to act. Some had succeeded, others had not, but each had shown courage. And for those sitting in that assembly, her words weren't just words. They were a call to action, a reminder that each of them had a role to play in making the world a better place. Next, it was time for Mr. Anderson to speak. He rose slowly from his seat, walking to the front with a calmness that masked the storm of emotions he was feeling. The students watched him intently, their eyes wide, and the rest of the room fell into a deep silence. Mr. Anderson took a breath, looking out at the faces before him. He hadn't planned on saying much, but now, standing there, he realized he had something to share that went beyond his own experience. With a steady voice, he began to speak about what it was like to be in his shoes that day. He spoke about the fear, the frustration, and the feeling of helplessness that had washed over him as the officers approached. But he also spoke about the pride and gratitude he felt when he saw his students stand up for him, their faces filled with determination and courage. He looked at them, one by one, and thanked them. He thanked them for reminding him that even in the darkest moments, there were people who would stand by him, who would fight for justice, even if it meant going against authority. His words left a powerful impact. Some students had tears in their eyes. Others sat silently, processing everything he had said. And as he finished, the room erupted in applause, not the polite kind, but the kind that comes from deep within, from a place of shared understanding and respect. Mr. Anderson returned to his seat, and in that moment, the weight of what had happened, the reality of the incident and its implications, settled on everyone there. The conversations didn't stop after the assembly. In classrooms, during lunch, and even outside of school, students discussed the incident, the assembly, and the issues that it had brought to light. They debated, they shared personal stories, and some even opened up about their own experiences with prejudice or discrimination. The students who had been on the bus became unexpected leaders, guiding these conversations with a wisdom beyond their years. They shared how it felt to stand up for Mr. Anderson, how terrifying and empowering it had been, and how they now understood that they had a responsibility to speak up, even when it was hard. The incident and the assembly sparked a wave of change within the school and beyond. Teachers began incorporating discussions on social justice, empathy, and activism into their lessons, allowing students to explore these issues in a structured and thoughtful way. The school counselor, Ms. Jenkins, organized workshops and support groups, offering a safe space for students to share their feelings and learn more about these complex social issues. Students who had once felt disconnected or disinterested in these topics found themselves engaged, wanting to learn more, to understand the world around them and their role in it. The impact reached beyond the school, too. Parents began having discussions at home, conversations that might never have happened otherwise. Some parents found themselves challenged, forced to confront their own beliefs and biases as their children shared what they had learned. Others felt a newfound pride in their children, seeing them as not just kids, but as young adults with the courage to stand up for what they believed in. The incident even caught the attention of local media. Reporters reached out to the school, wanting to cover the story, to highlight the bravery of the students and the strength of Mr. Anderson. They interviewed parents, teachers, and community leaders, capturing the raw emotions and diverse perspectives that had emerged. The story was broadcast on local news, and soon people from neighboring towns and even other states began reaching out, offering their support and sharing similar stories of injustice and courage. The incident had become more than just a moment. It had become a movement, a catalyst for change that resonated far and wide. In the weeks that followed, the community came together in ways they hadn't before. They organized events, fundraisers, and discussions focused on social justice, unity, and compassion. Churches, community centers, and local organizations joined in, each offering their own resources and support. It was as if a new sense of purpose had taken root, one that brought people together and reminded them of the power they held when they stood united. For the students, especially those who had been on the bus, the experience left a lasting impact. They had seen the difference they could make, the change they could spark just by standing up for what was right. They understood now that they had a voice, and that voice had the power to challenge injustice, to inspire others, and to create a ripple effect that could reach further than they had ever imagined. Each of them carried the memory of that day with them, a reminder of the courage they had shown and the unity they had found. It was a lesson they would carry for life, a guiding light that would shape their choices, their beliefs, and their actions. And as they continued through school and beyond, they did so with a newfound strength, a sense of purpose that came from knowing that they could make a difference. The community, too, changed. The incident had opened their eyes to issues they had overlooked, had forced them to face uncomfortable truths and take action. It was a journey that wasn't easy, that had stirred up emotions, debates, and sometimes even conflict. But in the end, it had brought them closer together, had reminded them that true strength came not from avoiding challenges, but from facing them head-on, from standing up for what was right, and from supporting one another.